because of the Ukraine crisis, the North Korea, the priority of North Korea has fallen even lower if it was ever a priority to begin with. I do think at the beginning of the administration there was some attention by the Biden administration to address the North Korea situation. As you know, there was a policy review, and then after the 100-day review, the United States did try to reach out and engage North Korea on multiple fronts, saying that they were ready to meet the North Koreans anywhere, any place. They had also offered humanitarian assistance, including COVID-19 vaccines, but North Korea just did not respond. And I'm sure a large part of it is attributed to the pandemic lockdown, the border lockdowns, and North Korea not really engaging with any country. But because North Korea did not answer the Biden administration at all, I do think that it fell in terms of priority. Missile tests, these provocations from North Korea, and then of course from the beginning of 2022, we've seen 9 missile tests now, maybe more, because there is some reports of a failed missile launch this past week. But the point is, because there hasn't been as much attention, we've seen North Korea thinking about rethinking its strategy and perhaps testing the Biden administration, see where their limits are. So it's been a fairly low priority. But that being said, despite the Ukraine crisis ongoing, we did see some strong statements from Ambassador Sung Kim, the U.S. Envoy for the special representative to North Korea, warning the North Koreans that this isn't a time to be launching missiles, or in terms of the UN Security Council, there was a push to try to get a resolution, or at least condemn North Korea for violating UN Security Council resolutions by conducting these tests. So we've seen the United States being vocal, even though I would say that the focus has been on Europe. So it's still, I think, a low priority, but they don't want to completely ignore what North Korea is doing. This is where I may differ from the US administration, because I don't think sanctions will actually do any more damage for North Korea at this point. North Korea has imposed its own sanctions with the border lockdown due to the pandemic, and that's had a stronger effect in terms of in terms of closing off North Korea from the rest of the world than any UN or US sanctions. And so adding on to that is not going to be effective. And as you mentioned, clearly with the Russia crisis going on, North Korea is going to try to support Russia as much as it can. But in terms of what the Biden administration can do, I mean, if sanctions is not really going to work, one thing I've suggested in an op-ed was I actually do think that US counterintuitively should actually think about releasing some of the sanctions and trying to engage to try to draw North Korea out of its shell. It has to offer some kind of package that the North Korea can come out and accept, or at least begin to negotiate. And we know that denuclearization is it's not something that North Koreans are willing to do. That's not really a starter for them. But I think because of that, right now, if the whole idea is to enhance, or if it's to improve the security situation on the Korean Peninsula, Northeast Asia, right now that means getting North Korea to stop these missile tests, to stop moving further ahead in its missile program, perfecting its missile capabilities, and also means freezing its nuclear program. And so if that's the immediate goal, you have to have some kind of engagement or dialogue. And I do think that the US is coming from a position of strength, and it wouldn't be a huge loss to offer some level of sanctions relief in return for North Korea. So this is an unconditional sanction. I should be clear upon the unconditional sanctions relief, but it's using sanctions or rolling back sanctions as a way to get North Korea to come back to the table to agree to some kind of security enhancing measures on the Korean Peninsula. I don't know how we would get to that point. I had thought at one point that North Korea would be facing a massive food crisis or a humanitarian crisis that would require it to come out of its shell and to seek assistance, things like, COVID-19 vaccines. But I think the North Koreans may feel that they can ride out this pandemic at this point. So I'm not sure. We've seen new calls to offer North Koreans 60 million vaccines, enough to populate the whole country. I don't know if that may help change North Korea's attitudes. But again, if for the U.S. administration, what it can do if sanctions aren't really a viable tactic in its playbook, I actually think it should do the reverse and maybe offer rolling back some of the sanctions. It's in terms of security and survival for the North Korean regime. I mean, there's external security. We can give those guarantees, and I think there's been statements made from past administrations that we have no intention of invading North Korea, that there's no intention of regime change, that the U.S. Forces in Korea is there strictly for defense and deterrence. Same thing with U.S. ROK joint military exercises. Those are purely for defensive purposes, not to invade North Korea. So we've been very clear about that. What would be very difficult to guarantee is what happens if North Korea gives up its nuclear weapons, but there's pressure within the country for change. If let's say that North Korea gives up its nuclear weapons, in return, economic relations are restored with other countries. There's more economic engagement, there's more trade and more investment, and the economy begins to broaden and develop. If that creates some kind of internal dynamic with North Korea for change and reform, that's not something that the U.S. can guarantee to prevent. So unfortunately, I don't think there's a guarantee on that. But as far as the U.S. goes, we can offer external security guarantees. We can show the way of how you can transition and how there can be continuity in leadership if North Korea were to give up nuclear weapons and to develop its economy. But there's, of course, no 100% guarantee. And the U.S., of course, is very much in terms of, as a liberal society, we leave the fate of countries up to their own hands, just like we're talking about Ukraine. It's up to the Ukrainians to decide whether they join NATO or not. And so in the same way, it's up to North Koreans how they determine their own future. So I think that's the best that the U.S. can do.